Hello, my chapter is chapter 1, and it's over the urban utopias in the 20th century. And it talks about Ebenezer Howard, Frank Lloyd Wright, and Le Corbusier. First of all, who are they? They're all three passionate theorists that brought an eagerness to the urban design. Howard was a devoted cooperative socialist. He was described as an honest man who was ambitious yet also discreet. He was loved by all the ones around him. He also had a bushy mustache and he was bald-headed. Mr. Wright was a writer, Democrat, and a spokesman for an American dissentrist movement. He was considered a handsome man with well-maintained long hair, and he often wore tailor suits with flowing capes. Le Corbusier was a painter and designer of modern architecture. He once was a watch engraver, and through experimentation and innovation, he became the architect that he was. First of all, these men all shared a common idea. They wanted an ideal city, a utopia. We can all imagine what it would be like to have an ideal city. We have one in our heads, our minds. But all three of these took it one step further. These three men devoted tons of hours, lots of ideas, plans after plans, and layouts of their utopias. They didn't want to just improve these current cities that they lived in. They wanted complete transformation of urban environments. Why would they do this? Well, they were extremely scared of what their current cities would turn into if it kept on the path that it was. Whether it progress or regress, they were scared to find out. And they also thought that their designs would distribute the benefits of the machine age to all people and direct all the communities that they were involved in towards social harmony, which was the end goal. They also believed that the value of family life would be greatly improved if people were given the proper amount of light, space, and air. What did their models look like? Well, to go into more detail, they all started out with an empty canvas or drawing board. And this just gave them a chance to express their thoughts by starting from scratch. There were no contingencies, no ifs, ands, or buts. And although they lived in different time frames, they all used present time. They didn't do 10 or 20 years in the future. There was no physical location, and this was not a blueprint or a plan for any specific project. It was just a way that they could each express their vision. Each of their structures showed not only physical environment being beautiful and rational, which is illustrated here by the shell, but also the social structure, which reflected the goals of each individual, and that's the nut. Their ideal cities. Howard's was called the Garden City. He focused on decentralization and cooperative socialism. He had it in clumps of cities of 30,000 in population, and all amongst were untouched countryside. And he wanted to build it in an effort to lure people away from the busyness of the metropolitan cities like London out into these countrysides. He wanted to create a city where small-scale co-ops and direct democracies would thrive. Mr. Wright believes in individualism, and he also emphasized that each person should have the right to however much land they can use. The citizens of his ideal city would work part-time in small offices and factories and shops, and part-time on their farms. The decentralization would allow each individual to live their chosen life on their own land. Le Corbusier's city was called the Radiant City, and it was about individuality. His was opposite of Wright's belief. He thought that cities were not dense enough. He wanted the population to come into the cities and develop upwards into the sky by means of skyscrapers. And these would make up apartments that people would live in. Well, you wonder how it all began. Well, the first half of the 19th century was when a vast change in cities were growing rapidly, and this caused many of the residents to become frightened. Cities were growing up left and right at reckless speeds, overflowing past their historic walls and forts. London grew from 90,000 to 4.5 million. Paris grew from 500,000 to 2.5 million. Berlin from 190,000 to over 2 million. New York from 60,000 to 3.4 million. And Chicago started as a village in 1840 and grew to 1.7 million. And this explosion of cities took place during a period of laissez-faire and intense instability and speculation. These cities couldn't control their growth, and it turned into chaos. So this is why it all began. Some of the signs that these three theorists saw that gave them signals that they needed to change was that countrysides were becoming stagnant. People were abandoning their farms and homes to go live in the cities. Depopulation of rural areas and crisis in regional centers. These families that were skilled laborers gave up their farms and land, moved to inner city metropolis and seeking more successful lives, and then they ended up living in tiny one-bedroom apartments with bad living conditions. What was a primary factor that came into play during this time? Well, with the innovation of technology, there were endless possibilities to these theorists. Howard focused on the railroad system, and even though in their minds it was what caused the chaos, it could also help decentralize as it contributed to the growth of the cities as well. Mr. Wright valued the automobiles and roads that could contribute to the radical decentralization, and Le Corbusier, he had an opposite trend. He wanted skyscrapers to become streets in the air, as he called it, and this would eliminate the soulless streets of the old cities. Now keep in mind, each of these theorists had their own ideal city. So they were single-minded, elaborate visions rather than any kind of collaboration. So through countless hours, these cities became each of their own idea, like his city, with his buildings and his designs and his ideas. So each city purely expressed their individual visions, but at the same time, each step closer to the man's dream was a step away from reality. So it started becoming a fantasy land. They knew that these cities could not be built all at once, so they considered these as working models, in hopes that they would become a master key that could unlock to adjust to society. Now we're going to focus on Howard City. According to the textbook, he was the most influential of the three men. His book, Tomorrow, A Peaceful Path to Real Reform, has guided modern town planning. He wanted urban centers to have around 30,000 inhabitants, and they would surround a green belt of parks, greenery, and farms. He also emphasized quiet residential areas. He said that a properly ran society would look and function like a well-designed machine. If need be, changes are made to the city just as adjustments are to machines. He also valued low-density areas such as wide streets and alleyways. He divided his city into 6 different neighborhoods, as he called wards, and they each contained 5,000 people. and they would function as individual towns of their own, in a sense. Most residents would have a certain sized lot, and in the middle of the town would be the Grand Avenue, where the most important neighborhood institution was, which was the school. And it would function as a meeting hall or a library or even a site for religious worship. He had two cohesive forces that would bring citizens out of their neighborhoods. First was leisure, and it was Central Park. It had lots of recreational grounds and small shopping areas, restaurants, just a place where people could mingle. And the second was civil spirit. There were large public buildings, town halls, libraries, museums, concerts, lecture halls, and hospitals. He also had about 1,000 acres in the center of the city called an agricultural belt. This is where 2,000 farmers would live there and provide the city with the bulk of its food. This functioned as income for the farmers and offered food as a discount for the farm's residents. Initially, his city didn't focus on providing a diverse experience because he grew up in one where they didn't look to others to provide entertainment. But throughout time, he realized that he needed more diversity within a city to have it flourish. So he created a sister city called Social City. And this city represented his idea of the marriage of town and country. Each inhabitant would have the feeling and comfort of a community, but also enjoy all the advantages of a bigger city. He also enforced the right of space to all citizens of his city. Next is the Radiant City. In this city, every aspect of life was administered by those above it. Through the system of total administration, experts matched society's needs to its productive capacities. His belief that only discipline could create order he strongly desired. He had two key aspects, which were authority and plan. His plan and authority structure was the hierarchy of administration, also known as the pyramid of hierarchies. It represented syndicalism, where they all worked towards a common goal, and this team was always uninvolved in social pressures so that they could focus on it. It was considered a social work of art. In Tier 5, which is the bottom tier, were the normal workers, the white-collar employees and engineers. Out of them, there were chosen managers to be factories in Tier 4. Out of those, there were leaders to go to regional trade council, and out of those, it would become national council. And out of all those, they would be a national plan administration, and they would be the ones to make overall decisions. And the overall idea is that each task is a functional one in which they can carry out the plan. And he believes it's absolutely necessary. His basis is on organization and freedom, leisure and self-fulfillment. He had areas called unities, or high-rise apartments, where families were offered all kinds of amenities, like swimming pools, daycare, restaurants, things where it's all in one place in their apartment building. He thought that this would create a higher value of their family, where they could spend their time away from work more enjoyable. And I believe his was the most influential type of city. It would be somewhere where I would want to live. Thank you.